Hi, Dr. McMillan. I'm here with Maggie on my computer.
Okie doke. Thank you. So I want to start with a breaking news story. This actually just has come out recently. I've been seeing things that have been posted on this just like today. So let's check this out.
Anytime on CBS.
These Pacific Ocean waters may look pristine from above, but lurking beneath is an environmental tragedy that's been unfolding for generations. A toxic dump site that settled on the ocean floor decades ago continues to wreak havoc on marine life to this day. Meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Birardelli is back with more.
Dana, that toxic chemical is making its way higher and higher up the food chain. Now it's in marine mammals up and down the California coast. So we traveled there to see how these creatures are paying the price for environmental missteps from a half a century ago. Loud and exceptionally social, sea lions are known for making a scene. But this California sea lion is sick. Known affectionately as Mooncake, she's being screened at the Marine Mammal Center, which is right near the Golden Gate Bridge. She's just one of hundreds of struggling sea lions rescued from California beaches each year. Another indication, veterinarians say, of just how much the ocean is plagued.
About 25% of the adult and subadults do have cancer. And that is an extremely alarming number.
As lead veterinarian, Dr. Cara Field examines rescued sea lions for cancer.
Given the very severely high rate and how abnormal it is, it's really important that we understand what is driving this disease in these animals.
And now we may just have an answer. A recently published study points to high levels of DDT in the mammal's blubber. Before it was banned in 1972, DDT was used worldwide as a pesticide. The nation's largest manufacturer was right on the California coast. Montrose Chemical opened up its Los Angeles plant in 1947. By 1970, it was clear something was very wrong.
When a recent report showed a high presence of DDT in the fish, residents were shocked.
This polluted Pacific water was coming from millions of pounds of DDT discharged by Montrose. David Valentine, a University of California marine biologist, spent 10 years looking into the company's past practices.
So they dumped them into the storm drains, they dumped them into the sanitary sewer.
In response, a 34 square mile area just offshore was designated as a Superfund cleanup site. Montrose was sued, and almost half of the $140 million settlement was used by NOAA to try to restore at least some of the contaminated habitat.
And one of the goals of the restoration funds and restoration work is to enhance fisheries.
So the government tasked Jonathan Williams, a marine biologist from Occidental College, to design a 7-acre artificial reef just off the beach. So by providing healthier habitat right here, that means that it's less likely DDT is entering the food chain?
That's correct. If you have healthier habitat, you're going to have healthier fish.
For several decades, scientists and regulators were focused on the hazardous toxic Superfund site just about 2 miles offshore, while all the while an even more shocking discovery was waiting to be unearthed about 10 miles offshore in between here and Catalina Island.
Large barrels of DDT waste were being taken out on a barge and then jettisoned and dropped to the seafloor.
Chasing rumors of this second massive Montrose dump site 3,000 feet below, Valentine sent a submersible autonomous robot down into the abyss. Lo and behold, there are likely thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of barrels of DDT on the ocean bottom.
And getting the first pictures back was really the moment we went, oh wow, we're the first people to lay eyes on this in 60, 70 years.
But even with this underwater video, there was no response, let alone any course of action.
I've been beating the drum on this for 10 years. I've talked to numerous people within agencies, within government, trying to generate some interest.
But last year, after Valentine published his findings, interest finally followed. 10 years after your initial research, an article comes out in the fall, and then all of a sudden, there's a reaction to it, and there's a big research project going on right now just offshore.
That's exactly right. And I hope it is just the first of many things that gets done.
Last month, 35,000 acres of ocean floor was surveyed by Scripps Institution of Oceanography. The final count of barrels is still being tallied, but researchers describe their findings as overwhelming. But this new information is too little, too late for many of California's sea lion population. Veterinarians had to euthanize 29 mammals last year alone, all because of cancer. In the coming months, the plan is for state and federal agencies to convene to figure out just how to respond to these shocking findings. Now,
So, thoughts, questions? Has anyone else seen this in the news? Sea lions getting cancer makes no impact on you. You have nothing to say about that. Cute little sea lions.
It's like shocking. I don't know. It's like interesting how them like having cancer and that like well.
Thank you. You have restored my faith in my students. Let's switch. Oh, I just need to escape out. About half of you have taken the Unit 9 progress check. I was tempted to say those of you who haven't should go ahead and like take it now, and I'll do like an odds and ends review for everybody. But so what I'm going to do basically is based on the half of you took it, I'm going to have like an odds and ends sort of miscellaneous stuff to review today to talk about some of the things that came up. If you take the FRQ, I'll try to, I'm going to be scoring the Unit 9 FRQ from the progress check. If you take that probably tonight or tomorrow, so if you take that soon, I will give you some feedback on it. And on Friday, we're going to take our first practice exam. We're fortunate to be one of the last exams. So if you have another AP, you may have already had a review session for that class. We're going to be given one in the next week or two. This is going to be an optional afternoon review session. Also, that Friday and Thursday of that, I believe that week, if I'm not mistaken, is the senior exam days as well. So that would mean the Friday of our exam would also be an optional day for seniors. So I was going to make that another a review day for juniors and an optional one for seniors if you want to come in and prep for the exam, because I think it's that afternoon, unless I've got my timetable wrong in my head. No, it is the afternoon. Just as looking ahead sort of thing. Izzy, did you, or Ava, did I see one of your hands up? Okay. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about anything else that's happening in the class at the moment? Has anybody seen anything in the news that would give you hope for anything? Anything positive that you'd want to bring up, or anything at all? All right. Well, so you may have noticed that they mentioned that that DDT dumping ground is called a Superfund site. This Superfund is one of the required environmental legislations that you should be familiar with for the exam. This is a screenshot out of the APES curriculum from the AP people. And you won't see Superfund here because they're listing it by its official name, which is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, or CERCLA. Honestly, until every year until I have to teach it again, I forget that it's called CERCLA because everybody, the news, politicians, everybody calls it Superfund or the Superfund Act. And the idea why it's called Superfund is because the idea is if a really hazardous toxic waste dumping site is found, then this law, it's a federal law, is set up to require those companies to pay for cleaning up the hazardous waste. So they are funding the work. And that's great. But what has happened is that, yes, about in the original decades of Superfund, that happened. About 80% of the Superfund sites that were discovered the cleanup was paid for by the companies that polluted them. And 20%, either the company was no longer in existence or they couldn't figure out where the pollution, who did the polluting. And so they had to pay for it with taxpayer money. Some laws were changed in the mid-90s, or some of the ways that it was Superfund was funded were changed, and companies, it's harder to get companies to pay for it. It's also harder to provide taxpayer money to pay for it. So I believe right now only 8 out of 1,200, so that's less than, I think that's like 0.1% or something, of Superfund sites are actively being cleaned up. So Superfund is almost defunded for all intents and purposes, which is horrible. So that is a law that you need to be familiar with. This is sort of relates to both units 8 and 9. Another historical event you should know about is the original Superfund site that gave rise to this law. It's the Love Canal, which is a weird sounding name, but has anyone ever heard of that? All right. So Love Canal was a canal. In other words, a man-made river in upstate New York. It had originally was going to connect like 2 bodies of water, probably like one of the Great Lakes. But they never finished it. And a chemical company in the early 1900s was nearby, and they just dumped all of the toxic waste into it. Then they paved it over and built an elementary school on it 50 years later. And kids got cancer. It was horrible. So Love Canal is a tragedy in US history that you ought to know about, along with 3 Mile Island. Did you all read about that when you're reading about nuclear power? 3 Mile Island was a nuclear power plant that almost had a meltdown. We almost had a Chernobyl disaster about 10 or 15 years before Chernobyl happened. We came super duper close to having a meltdown. So that was also something that you should be aware of. Some of these things come up. Okay, So the Love Canal tragedy was what gave rise to the Superfund site. All right, in the progress check, it seemed like there was some trouble with the concepts of ocean acidification, ocean warming, coral bleaching, those sorts of things. Does anybody remember having a question about it? Has anyone learned something and there's something that is confusing you about it? Before I just launch into talking to you about it. Take that as a no. All right. So ocean acidification. This is unit 9. The main unit 9 is just global change. The big change that they're talking about is climate change, but they're also talking about some other minor things like species extinction, the loss of the ozone layer, and then some of the offshoots of climate change like ocean acidification. So ocean acidification is the process of excess CO2 dissolving into the ocean. And this happens all the time. This is natural. This is where a lot of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere goes. When it dissolves into seawater, it ends up becoming H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. So this is where the acidification comes from. Whenever you dissolve carbon dioxide into water, it becomes carbonic acid. You can kind of see what happens is that it's CO2 plus water becomes the acid. There's an extra 2 hydrogens and another oxygen being added in there. So that's straight up where the acidification comes from. The same thing happens in carbonated beverages. When you carbonate them and put CO2 into them, that turns into carbonic acid too, which is why you get warned about drinking a lot of carbonated beverages and that damaging your teeth and that sort of thing. Okay. So that's where the acidification comes from. Let's talk about some of the problems with it. There's this whole big set of equilibrium reactions that happen with carbon dioxide and its related compounds in water. So you have carbonate and does anyone remember what hydrogen ions in water is? So carbonate ions in water is a thing that you can have. And if you add a hydrogen ion to it, I'm going to ask, does anybody know what hydrogen ions in water is? All right, everybody repeat after me. Hydrogen ions in water is acidity. Repeat. Repeat one more time. along with water is polar, hydrogen ions in water is acidity, are two things that I want my students to leave and remember and tell me when they come back and see me. Okay, so hydrogen ions in water is acidity. If you have an acid that gets near a carbonate ion, it becomes a bicarbonate ion, as in sodium bicarbonate, baking soda. If you add more acid to it, then you get water and CO2. And I'm gonna have to go around here. If you keep adding acid to it, then you can convert that to carbonic acid. So this is all sort of reversible steps. Hopefully at some point you learned about equilibrium, although I've got to admit, I think that I didn't spend a lot of time on equilibrium reactions when I was teaching some of you all chemistry. But this means reversible reactions that sort of, depending on how you push the reaction, it will go one way or the other. So what the problem is that ocean life needs carbonate ions. Other things that have those sort of shelly sort of skeletons on them besides coral also need carbonate ions. Coral is made from calcium carbonate. So if there's not carbonate in the water, then they can't grow. If you add a lot of excess CO2 into the water, you'll push this set of reactions towards the carbonic acid side and reduce the amount of carbonate in the water, and that's not good. A simpler way to think about it is acid dissolves chalk. Carbonate, calcium carbonate is chalk. If you put acid on it, water doesn't dissolve it, but acid does. So if you put acid onto coral, it will dissolve it. Straight up. So this is the fancier chemistry way to look at it. You're driving the equilibrium towards the carbonic acid side and reducing the amount of carbonate, or you could just think acid dissolves coral. Okay. So that is one of the big problems with ocean acidification. Other related things is that the excess CO2 in the atmosphere, you know, is leading to warming. As you warm water, the solubility of any gas dissolved in it goes down. You all know this intuitively, whether you realize that or not. Would you rather open a bottle of soda that has been in your car on a warm day or one that has been in a fridge? Because why? What will happen if you open a hot carbonated beverage? It'll spew. And that's because the only thing that's keeping the CO2 dissolved in that hot carbonated beverage is the fact that it's capped under pressure. As soon as you let the pressure out, it's going to undissolve and spew everywhere. If you have the water cold, more CO2 can dissolve in it and it won't blow up in your face. The same thing happens with oxygen. things that live in water need oxygen to live. If you warm up the ocean, it's going to make oxygen less soluble in it. So it's going to be harder for stuff to get the oxygen that they need for their metabolic needs. And so that's another reason why warming is a bad thing. We think about warm water being good because we're not water breathers and we just like it not to be so cold when we're in there. But actually for most fish and most aquatic organisms, colder water is better for them because they get more oxygen in it. So that's not about ocean acidification, that's just about ocean warming, but they're, you know, tangentially related. So there you go with that. All right, let me go back to my list. The last thing is just more of these legislations to note about. So whether we've really mentioned it much, the Clean Air Act is a thing. We talked about the Clean Water Act a little bit and the Safe Drinking Water Act when we talked about water quality. We just talked about Superfund. Oh no, this is Superfund. The two that we have that I wanted to talk about is this one, CITES. Oh, 3, Montreal Protocol, Kyoto Protocol, Endangered Species Act. Okay, 4. Oh gosh, 5, 6. So let's hit the rest of these because they actually all relate to Unit 9. So let's do Endangered Species Act and CITES first. So the Endangered Species Act is a US law. CITES is, as you can tell from the name, is an international treaty or convention. And a way that you can remember what CITES is about is if you remember that ivory is illegal on the planet. Ivory is illegal. And it's illegal because basically CITES is the idea that, okay, we can't make people behave. We can't make people stop killing elephants because they're just going to stop killing elephants. But maybe if we outlawed ivory and we made it so prohibitively costly if they got caught trying to sell ivory, people would stop killing elephants. And you know, just as a side note, I don't understand, maybe it's expensive to buy tranquilizer dots to put an elephant to sleep, but you know, putting an elephant to sleep and then just sawing off the tusks and letting it go, what's so hard about that? Why they gotta kill the whole freaking elephant just for that? Just people's short-sightedness really bugs me. There actually has been moves to think about doing for managers to do that, to cut proactively remove tusks from elephants. It would make them harder they use their tusks to eat, but so that can make it hard on them, but it's probably why they haven't done it, but just to keep people from killing them for it. Many parrots are illegal to trade internationally as pets. And that's what this is all about. It's basically animals and plants that are alive or dead and products made for them. If these are endangered species, it's illegal to trade them. Izzy?
Wasn't there like, maybe this is completely wrong, but like, did someone like the organizations that were trying to protect the elephants, like dye their tusks like pink or something? So they like wouldn't be like, no.
I haven't heard that one. I know that there was a big tusk bonfire. So like a lot of confiscated ivory was just burnt. I'm not quite sure that I get why they did that. It seems like they might have.
Like, so that they wouldn't want to.
I guess that was so that they could like take the market out, but it seems like that would just make higher demand for it if you got rid of it. But yeah, that's the thing. So this is an international treaty that's meant to prevent the trade in either actual animals and plants and things or their products. It's hard to enforce because basically you need to have like customs agents at airports and shipping yards inspecting things and making sure that illegal stuff isn't being sold, like rhinoceros horn and wild parrots and things like that. And I'm sure that a lot of stuff slips through the cracks. The Endangered Species Act is also about protecting species, and it's basically if a building project or any sort of development is going to happen that could lead to the extinction of a species that's prohibited by law. This has been challenged many times. One of the first major challenge to the law actually happened right around where I grew up back in the 70s. There was a dam that was going to be built, and there was a little minnow. I mean, literally the size of a jumbo paperclip is the adult size of this fish that evidently only lived in one river, and damming the river was going to make the fish go extinct. And so there was this multi-year lawsuit at the federal level to figure out whether they would allow the dam to be built. They finally allowed the dam to be built. And so it was kind of like we decided that it was okay for us to let a fish go extinct. And I kind of wonder if it had been like a cuddly mammal, if that would have happened. Probably not. Bright side, they found another population of the minnow in another river, so it's not extinct. Still endangered, but not extinct. All right, so those, we got those checked off. Anyone know what the Montreal Protocol is? So this is the very good, Tara. This is the international treaty that banned the manufacture and sale of chlorofluorocarbons, the ozone depleting gases that had been manufactured for propellants and refrigerants. So this is seen as the best international global environmental protection agreement ever. The next one, the Kyoto Protocol, is seen as one of the biggest failures for international agreements to try to protect the environment. Does anyone know what it is? This was an international agreement to limit carbon emissions. There was, the meeting was held, you guessed it, in Kyoto, Japan. And it was going to be a big international treaty to try to stave off climate change. This happened before you all were born. So there's been concerns and attempts to try to steer us off the path to escalating. Climate change has been happening for decades, and every generation thinks that they're the first one to try it out. But this happened, and it failed because there wasn't buy-in from the two biggest emitters, namely US and China. And I think it was mainly China pulled out because we pulled out first. Yep. So we were that guy. All right. So the Kyoto Protocol was a big fail. And now this isn't in the list, but I wouldn't be surprised if you might have seen the Paris Accords mentioned. This is the new attempt at the same sort of idea behind the Kyoto Protocol, limiting greenhouse gas emissions globally. And this has been agreed on. President Biden has signed on after President Trump signed off, after President Obama signed on. So we've been on again, off again. Hopefully, we will continue to stay in this. It really seems like internationally, there's a lot more goodwill about trying this out and trying to make a go of this. Okie doke. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act is a US law. This is basically, it's a big, complicated set of laws about disposing of hazardous waste and how you handle hazardous waste. So this is sort of the prevention law that corresponds to Superfund. So this is, let's make a law that governs how we deal with hazardous waste so that we don't make more Superfund sites. And there are take-back laws wrapped into this, meaning some things like car batteries, you can't just throw away. You have to take back to the store and turn them in because they have lead in them and you don't want that to get out in the environment. Honestly, the European Union is much better at this than the US is. They have much more stringent laws. Like if you buy a TV, you're supposed to take your TV or a fridge back to the store, or the store is supposed to be responsible for taking it back and getting it disposed of properly. We don't do anything like that here. It's only like super duper hazardous stuff that we have in there. Lastly, the Delaney clause of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This one is kind of funny in my mind. So the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is from 1938. This was a clause that came 20 years later in 1958. And basically, short and sweet, it says, if you find out that a chemical caused cancer, you can't put it in food or drugs. Yep. We had to have a law to say that you can't put carcinogens in food. We couldn't just depend on people not to do it. But that's what it is. Yep, you gotta love humanity. Okie doke. We are at 10:20. I am going to ask that if you have not yet to do the Unit 9 progress check. And I'm also going to ask that you to please keep up with the reading quizzes and be ready as best you can to take our first practice exam on Friday. It should take the entire time, and it's probably going to be using I'm pretty sure, I need to go back and verify this, but I'm pretty sure that the practice exams, they won't let me administer them without the lockdown browser on them. So if you're someone who had trouble with the lockdown browser before, let me know. And I'll see what I can do about that. I think if I have any other thing to add. Anybody got any questions about anything that's coming up? Yeah. Yes, the 14th at noon, I believe, is the exam. Well, I wanted to show you something else. So this is a website maintained by Dr. Raup, I believe at the University of Maryland. He and some others have started a Brood 10 website for documenting what's going to happen with the 2021 Brood 10 emergence. Is there anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about? All right. So, periodic cicadas. Yep. Periodic cicadas, sometimes commonly known as locusts, which is a misnomer. Locusts are technically grasshoppers, and cicadas are a completely different kind of insect. But all cicadas have a life cycle where eggs are laid in the ground. When they hatch, you have these juveniles that find a tree root, and they have this sort of like syringe-like mouth part, and they just tap into the root, and they live on sap for a certain amount of time. There's a few species that come out every year, but in North America, we're lucky to have these sort of almost miraculous species that come out in different periods. There's a 13-year cicada and a 17-year cicada, and there are these big broods. So these big populations that cover sometimes several states that are all timed on the same time schedule. So Brood 10 is a brood that is found in the mid-Atlantic, and this year it's been 17 years since they were here the last time, and they're coming back. And the first recorded photograph this year on this website was actually taken by the Aragonsias. Yeah, way. In case you're not familiar with Miss Aragoncia is the chair of the math department here at Bryn Mawr. So this is the first one. They actually are very pretty. You just have to change your aesthetic. Cicadas are actually, cicadas are super pretty. I'm going to show you. So yeah, they got big red eyes. Let's see if we can find some tropical cicadas. So I think it's actually rather attractive. They got those pretty wings. They've got the big eyes. I think they're pretty cool. But let's see if we can find some. They're actually like big beefy butterflies, if you know.
I think it's the beauty that scares me.
Yeah, so that's the.
I think that's what
Yeah, so that's the thing that's going to happen. They attract mates the males attract mates by making this sound, by vibrating air through their bodies, and yeah, they're really loud.
How bad is it? Do they swarm? There's no little tag either.
Yeah.
I was not.
Well, you hear them. You hear So you hear swamp cicadas every year. Those are the annual ones.
Am I not going to be able to leave my house for 3 weeks?
They're totally non-harmful. They're not poisonous. They don't do much except for making the sound. And I like this sound. It makes me think it's summer. See, that sound right there where they start to get slower, that just feels like summer to me. It actually is a pleasant sound. It's got some like weird drum-like organs that it vibrates in its abdomen. They also have this cooling system. They have evaporative cooling systems. So especially like desert adapted ones, they tap into a tree and they suck sap through it and they pump water basically out of their body and they just keep themselves from overheating that way. Yeah. I think they're pretty awesome. Hmm? So they have been in a juvenile like sort of nymph state, so like an unwinged pre-adult state, just sucking on a tree root for 17 years. And they're going to have about a month of adult life for maybe just a couple of weeks. So basically they live for 17 years as a teenager, and then they get 2 weeks to find a mate, make some kids, and die. The reason that this big strategy behind doing this is so that if you flood the ecosystem with prey like this, then a lot of them are going to make it through. So the idea is, all right, many of you are going to have to take one for the team, but if you do, there's going to be a lot of us that will make it through and be able to reproduce. So there, you see this a lot in nature, like oak trees do this. They'll go 2 or 3 years without making a lot of acorns, and then they'll have something called a mast year, and they'll just dump thousands and thousands of acorns, and that way no squirrel could eat them all, and some of them are going to make it through. You may have noticed some years when it seems like there's just acorns everywhere. They actually, like entire regions, somehow the oak trees know and they coordinate it, and they all sort of do it at the same time.
For that cicadas, isn't it like 17 years is an unpredictable amount of time for their predators, so then they just show up and no one expects it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's so long that none of their predators expect it to happen. What's that?
I don't like it. I like it. No. If I was reincarnated as a cicada, I would know.
You'd like to just be chill and zen for 17 years and yeah. So I've been looking myself for over a week for them. I think it's awesome that the Aragontia saw one, but if you go home, look around, if you have a tree outside your house, look around to the ground, and if you see like a dime-sized hole in the ground, that's where a cicada has crawled up off the roots and is ready to go molt and become an adult. They're not super specific. They probably don't do conifers, I think, but they do just about any of the hardwood trees. Yeah. They don't hurt anybody. They just fly around and want to, you know, mate. That's pretty it, and eat. I kind of want to try to eat some. Yeah, they're edible. Like pretty edible. Yeah, I've had crickets and mealworms. Yeah, did we not do a lesson about taboo, you know, the insect eating taboo and about what? And it's got a much lower subsidy, so a lot less energy has to go into making it. Yeah. Eating cicadas real quick. I think last year, yeah, so there's been a lot. Can you eat cicadas? Yes, you can eat cicadas. Supposedly, the best time to pick them to eat them is just when they come out of the ground, because they'll be. Mm-hmm. Yep. And lastly, we haven't really talked much about scientific names of things, but the periodic cicadas, the ones that come out every 17 years, the genus is Maggia cicada, the magic cicada. I just love that. It makes me happy. All right. Let's see, what else did I want to announce? Oh, well, I'll probably mention this again, but Friday is going to be the kickoff of the International City Nature Challenge, an international effort to record as many species as possible. So I will give you more details on Friday about how you can participate in that if you're interested. And I'm going to say, let's sign off. Let me know if you have any questions about anything. I turned on the grades for the reading quizzes for Unit 9, so you should be able to see what you've been making on them. And please, please, please take the progress check.
Thank you.
Welcome.